Hello and welcome to the Cold War Prepper Monday night Civics 101, U.S. Government 101. People should be getting the notification that we're on live here in just a minute or two, and we can see people start popping in. So in the meantime, if you're watching this on the replay, do me a favor, please hit the like, subscribe, all those kinds of things that kind of make sure you get to see the rest of the stuff we have coming out. Hello, Little Lone Prepper. Welcome. Always good to see you. One of my favorite North Carolinians. My other one lives up near Asheville. Danny Rose. He and I went to basic Indonesian language school together in the Army back in 1971 in Monterey, California. So he left the Army in 1975, 76-ish, and went to work for the railroads. And then he retired from the railroads and lives just east of Asheville, a little area there. And God, that area is just so gorgeous. Love that area. Just absolutely love it. Hello, Diana, too. Welcome. Good to see you. Look at my hair. I guess I need to go get some of this thinned. It used to be when I was on active duty, every Tuesday morning, I would go to the barber at 9 o'clock and have my hair cut. And I told him to thin it. Now I'd like to go twice a week and tell them to thicken it, see if they can't give me back some of the hair they took out. Hello, Holly Ivans. Welcome. Good evening. Always good to see you as well. Well, tonight we're going to actually start into the non-historical part. The other part was kind of leading up to what we're going to be doing tonight. And so this is really, really great poo-poo that just, you say, gosh, we continue to make mistakes and then correct from them afterwards. And what a great country we've become and where we are. And, and every once in a while we have our setbacks. We're having one of those setbacks now in our country, and we'll see how things go. We seem to have recovered from them so far, almost every time, and made some corrections, fixed some things, and and gotten along pretty well. And so hopefully we can do it again. Hello, Cats and Prepping. Welcome, Sue Me. How are you? Good evening. So anyhow, for those of you who don't know, there was an M5.6 earthquake hit Jamaica, intensity level 8. That's a terrific earthquake. So that means it was fairly shallow. It had a lot of shaking, tore buildings down and everything else. So if you check your news, you'll probably see some information about that. U.S. and Israel have both been told by the Iranians that we have crossed the red line and to look for things to happen, dramatic things to happen in the very near future. Of course, U.S. has been taking an active part in retaliating against the rockets and everything being launched at U.S. forces in Iraq and Syria. And it's just, it's falling apart, So all I can say is prep up. I just put out a video a while ago on German pea soup, and not split pea, but German sweet pea, and it's a good one. I only had it once or twice when I was in Germany, but gosh, I tell you, when I was in Germany, the one thing that I loved the most, just a minute, the black dog wants up on the couch. She's 15 and her legs don't let her do what she wants to. Thank you for that indulgence. She's something else. She runs the house, and she reminds us of that on a regular basis. But anyhow, so we've kind of walked through the history of the U.S. pretty much up until the Revolution, and now the Revolution was ended with the Peace of Paris, 1783. I don't remember the exact date. Let me see. Ooh, it's in here somewhere. I'm just going to have to say 1783. So the United States needed some sort of organization, document, whatever, rules of governance, I guess you would call them. And so they came up with the Articles of Confederation. We didn't have a written constitution. We had the Articles of Confederation. And so a couple of things that it did for us. It was a confederacy of states. So the states were loosely aligned with each other and formed a weak centralized government. So some of the Articles of Confederation proposed the following: a national government with a Congress empowered to make peace, coin money, appoint officers for an army, control the post office, and negotiate with the Indian tribes. 2, each state would retain its own independence and sovereignty or ultimate authority to govern within its own territories. Number 3, one vote in the Continental Congress for each state, regardless of size. So that's kind of going to carry over into the Constitution, where we have 2 senators per state, regardless of size. Since there were 13 states, they required 9 to pass any measure. And in order to get an amendment to the Articles of Confederation, you had to have a unanimous vote. And the selection and payment of delegates to the Congress was by the respective state legislatures. This was ratified in 1781, March of 1781. But it had some problems, and probably the biggest problem was the lack of a centralized government to take care of some of the issues that they had. Hello, Phaeoxerus. Welcome. Susan's Ramblings, welcome. So we've got a critical period. We've got a lot of debt from the revolution. Now, remember, the revolution has been going on for almost 7 years, 1775 until 1781, late in 1781. So it's been quite an endeavor, and a lot of money has been lost, and a lot of money has been spent. Most of the signers of the Declaration of Independence have either been killed or gone into bankruptcy. As we remember, they pledged their solemn. What did they pledge? They pledged their honor and their properties and everything else. And so, yeah, that they spent their properties to give us independence. The first person to head over the Confederation, if you want to call it that, was a guy by the name of John Hanson, who had been a former member of the Maryland House of Delegates. And but like I said, the biggest problem that we had with the Article of Confederation was each state was independent. So, remember, the Article of Confederation said that they had the right to make peace, but it did not say it had the right to declare war. It had the right to negotiate with the Indians, but it did not have rights to protect people from the Indians. So there's a whole bunch of things where they couldn't raise a national army. The militias, basically, of each state were going to defend each state, and there wasn't going to be a national army, although there was a national navy, which is kind of strange. In 1780, Massachusetts adopted its own state constitution, and it appeared to favor the interests of the wealthy. And so we have this pendulum that continuously swings in the United States, one way and another. So remember, it was the rich who gave up everything to try to have to pay for the revolution. Well, not all the rich. We always have that bifurcation, that two sides of on every issue, where left versus right versus up versus down versus D versus R versus we always have that. So you had some of the rich people who just happened to be the ones in control, who were passing the laws on taxation and repatriation and replenishment of the arms and all that kinds of stuff. And they were writing the laws in Massachusetts to their own advantage. So then along 1780-ish comes along the Shays Rebellion. So Shay was a captain in the Massachusetts militia, and he got together with 1,500 of his former militiamen. And when the Massachusetts legislature passed a law that they were going to tax all these other people, confiscate their land, confiscate everything they had in order to repay the big guys, the rich guys, for the money that they had laid out, Shay and his 1,500 militiamen occupied the courthouse where the judge was supposed to write the order saying this is what's going to happen. Well, it didn't happen. Okay. So they occupied that courthouse for almost 3 years. And so by finally, the state of Massachusetts raises its own militia army separate from these other 1,500. Okay. And they had a private investor pay for that. And so February 4th of 1787, this privately paid force put a stop to the war that was called Shays Rebellion. So they won, and the law went into effect. However, remember, the states raised the armies, not the federal government. And so there was no federal government to come down and support Massachusetts against this 1,500 militiaman revolution that was going on against Massachusetts and their unfair taxation of the middle and lower income. Why did we have the Revolutionary War in the first place? It was because of taxation without representation. And now we've got the exact same thing being replicated in Massachusetts. And so that's what these guys were fighting for. They said, wait a minute, we just spent 7 years fighting the Brits, the biggest empire on earth, because we didn't like this crap. And now you're going to do it to us after we've won the war. No, that's not going to happen. So you had this internal conflict that was going on. So they said, well, we need to rethink this, because if the federal government isn't going to come and help us, we need to redo this Articles of Confederation. Here's an interesting side note. So a friend of mine, we have an Alliance of Ministries, and I represent our church to the Alliance of Ministries. So, there's probably 30 members, 30 different churches that belong to this alliance, and we get together once a month. So we created our local food bank. We created a local assistance office to help people who are impoverished. We have a thrift store that basically runs that operation. I mean, we do all kinds of things through the Alliance of Ministries. And so this is 30 different churches got together, and we're trying to do things to help people here in the county. And so the county courthouse has a statue, and it's of a Confederate soldier. And so at our last meeting, they said, we need to stand unanimously and oppose this statue being on county property. And so we will all want to sign our names to this document that says, no, we need to get rid of it. I said, I can't do that. I can't sign for my church. Number one, I don't have the authority to do that, because that's a decision that I'd have to take back and have other people make the decision on. But number two, the reasons you've given are political and not religious in nature. And what? I said, well, you said that having it there is illegal. Okay, nobody told me what the law is, but you told me it's illegal. You told me that it's causing people to not want to go downtown because they're afraid of an inanimate object, a statue. I said, so, all these things that you're telling me, nothing there says this is our moral obligation to remove it. And so a friend of mine started sending me emails, and one of the emails was, and we got into a discussion about, she said, well, you're a veteran. You should be opposed to having, the Southern Confederate soldier veteran being honored in your county. I said, no, he fought for what he thought was right. And, that's what we're talking about here right now, is these Articles of Confederation is up until after the Civil War, or the War of Northern Aggression, depending upon which side of the Mason-Dixon line you grew up on. It was, your state came first. The federal government was an afterthought. The United States was an afterthought. Your state was number one. It was paramount. So as a soldier, you were primarily in your state's militia. Now, if you take a look at all the military units in the War of Northern Aggression, you had the 33rd Massachusetts and the 95th Massachusetts and the 15th Ohio and the 3rd Virginian and all these different regiments, okay? And they had a numerical designation and the state that they came from, and that was because they were being raised by the states, not by the federal government. And so I said, so I can't fault the guy for fighting for his state. That was his number one thing. She says, well, the Articles of Confederation said it was illegal for a state to secede from the the Confederation of States. She called it the United States. I said, well, number one, it's the Confederation of States. It's basically a confederacy under the Articles of Confederation. So yes, that's true. It did say that you can't secede from these Articles of Confederation. However, 3 years after the Articles of Confederation were passed, it was superseded by the Constitution. And the Constitution says nothing about secession. She says, well, but there's a Supreme Court ruling in 1789 that made it illegal for any state to secede. And I said, to the victor goes the spoils. So the war was over in 1765. I'm sorry, it was 1769. So the war was over in 1765. So in 1769, the Supreme Court says what you did 9 years ago was illegal. Okay. But it wasn't declared illegal at the time that they did it. So you got to understand all these things about the Articles of Confederation, the Constitution, when things happen, how they happen, and everything else. And I don't think people really think things out when they try to make these arguments. Now, I did finally hear something. I got a copy of the speech that erected and dedicated the monument. And when I read the speech, I said, well, that convinces me it probably should be removed for the reasons that it was erected, not for the reasons it was not for the reasons that were given to me. In case you haven't been able to discern my personality, let me share my personality with you just a little bit. I'm Roman Catholic, okay? And my entire life, people have told me what Catholics believe, and they don't know what they're talking about. So there's been all kinds of wild accusations. People don't know what they're talking about. They make things up. They say, you do this, you do that, whatever. And I say, where's your proof? They haven't been able to prove it. I can prove the opposite. And, that's the way it is. I left the church for about 30 years. And because my dad was not a member of the church, and became a 32nd degree Mason and a Shriner. And so during that time, all kinds of people say all kinds of things about the Masons. They don't know what they're talking about. They create the truth in order to create hatred. So that's the second organization I belong to, where people just willy-nilly make up things and say things about them that aren't true. Okay. So I'm starting to think, guys, if you're going to make an accusation, do me a favor, have a little bit of proof behind it, and not just pure speculation or hatred. Third one, my occupation. Okay. For 21 years, I worked for the Army Security Agency. So what do you call it when the Army Security Agency, the Navy Security Group, and the Air Force Security Service all get put into the same building? It's called the National Security Agency. Nobody in the federal government gets bashed more than NSA, and people don't know what NSA does, but I give a couple hints. Number one, it is a military organization. It's headed by a 3-star general. It is not like CIA or FBI that are run by civilians and have authority to work in the United States. NSA does not have authority to work inside the United States because it's military. It can only be used against our enemies. So that's another one where now all of a sudden I'm having to say, hey guys, you don't know what you're talking about. You're coming up with speculative things. And so I have led a defensive life my entire life. Okay. So if you're going to say something, I would like to see a little bit of rationale behind it. I would like to see a little bit of proof behind it. And so that's why we need to study these documents and the history of our country, because there's a lot of things that people are going to tell you that may or may not be right. I want to make sure that we have the truth. Okay. Matter of fact, I was on a live stream And a couple things were said. Number one, they said don't put more than 2 emojis. The channel will get banned. You guys can put all the emojis you want, because there's nowhere that I can find on YouTube that says if you put more than 2 emojis, you're going to take the channel down. The other one said, if you're watching, you have to comment, because if you don't comment in the chat, then your watch time doesn't count. I haven't been able to find that anywhere. Nobody can tell me what the source of that is. So I'm one of those guys. I just want to show me a little bit of proof, show me a little bit of rationalization, and I'm a happy camper. And that's what we're talking about here, is about, writing the Constitution. Okay, so let's get back to that. Here's an interesting thing I bet you didn't know. Benjamin Franklin was 81 years old when they were writing the Constitution. And because he was kind of a blowhard, because he liked strong ale, when they went to lunch and dinner, somebody had to be with him all the time. They didn't want him blowing his mouth over what they were doing and how they were getting it accomplished. So Benjamin Franklin had to be escorted the entire time that they had the Philadelphia Convention, where they were writing the Constitution. They didn't want him leaking. They didn't want him to be one of those leakers, So they started meeting May 25th, 1787 in Philadelphia for the sole purpose of revising the Articles of Confederation. And what they ended up doing was writing a whole new document. I put a wrong thing in the show notes. I said Delaware and Virginia, but it was New Jersey and Virginia plans. So you had a couple things going on. The biggest philosopher of the time was a guy by the name of Montesquieu in France. And so Montesquieu is talking about several new ideas, having a bicameral legislature, where you have 2 portions of the legislature, one representing the people and the other representing the lords, if you will, which is basically what we end up with in Great Britain. We have the House of Lords and we have the House of Commons. So the same thing in France, okay? And so we're taking that idea and we're adapting it and bringing it to the United States. And so we have 2 chambers, just like they do in Britain and in France. We have the upper chamber, which is called the Senate, and that represented the states, okay? Then we have the lower chamber called the House of Representatives, and that represented the people. So Fioxer says, Lee, I see the same thing here from some people towards Catholics and Mormons. The Wyoming Catholic College has done a lot of good in my town, and the Mormons do good for their people mainly. I will tell you my personal opinion. I will never tell anybody that what they believe is wrong. You aren't going to hear me say this is what you need to do to prep. You're not going to hear me say this is what you need to do religion-wise. You're not going to hear me say anything about this is what you need to do. What I will do is I will tell you this is what I am doing, okay? If you like it, you can follow it. If you don't like it, that's fine. But I have no right to tell anybody anything. I can give some suggestions based upon my experience, but you don't have to follow them. I'm not expecting that you follow them. So I hope that comes across, that I'm just going to share my experience, my mistakes, some of the good things I've learned. Maybe we can go from there, and maybe you can build on it. That's that Hegelian dialectic. I think I've talked to you about that a couple of times. The Hegelian dialectic says you have a thesis, then you have an antithesis. So through conversation, communication, debate, you arrive at a synthesis somewhere in the middle. So the synthesis is the amalgamation of both ideas into one where both parties can agree upon it. So the new synthesis becomes the new thesis. So to that new thesis, there's a new antithesis. You arrive at a new synthesis. So the human intellect is constantly going up this incline towards a better level of thinking. And that's the Hegelian dialectic. Now, it was misused by the Communist Manifesto. So, yes, the Hegelian dialectic is mentioned in the Communist Manifesto, but I think it was misused. It was misappropriated. Still a valid, I still think it's a valid theory, but I think it was misused by the communists. Okay, so we had 2 plans, the Virginia plan and the New Jersey plan. And so Well, Weeping Willow, one thing I want you to do is understand that the one thing that I insist on is dignity and respect for everybody. That's your opinion. I would appreciate it if you keep that opinion to yourself. I don't castigate anybody's religion. I don't castigate anybody's beliefs. And I would appreciate it if you would withdraw that remark because I'm sorry. That is totally inappropriate. If you want to believe that, that's fine. Believe it in yourself. You don't need to say it. We all live in glass houses, and everybody's exposed for something. So I just won't tolerate it. That's a total lack of respect and dignity for other human beings. I don't care. I don't care. I want you to respect. Remember, I close every one of these with please be kind, polite, and respectful to each other. What you're doing here is not respectful, it's not kind, okay, and it's not polite. So my three main things that I want in this channel, you are violating. So if you want to leave now, you may do so. If you want to take down your posts, you may do so and stay. But if you stay, please understand, I expect you to be polite, kind, and respectful. Okay? Can we agree to that? Thank you. Have a nice day, Mr. Weeping Willow. So we had the Virginia plan and we had the New Jersey plan. So the Virginia, we have these two areas. Virginia was extremely rich, okay? New Jersey, not so. And so we have these two ideas about what we want to do as far as a country. So the New Jersey plan was the creation of a powerful central government with three branches, the judicial, the executive, and the legislature. And they wanted a bicameral legislature, two houses in the legislature, one controlled by the state and one controlled by the people. And then they wanted the legislature to do the election of the president, who select who the president and the cabinets were going to be. So the New Jersey plan, on the other hand, decided that what they would like to do is just kind of enhance the Articles of Confederation rather than throw them out and start all over again. They wanted a one-house legislature with one house for each state, regardless of the size of the population. And those representatives were going to be chosen by the legislatures and not by the people. And they were going to give Congress the power to raise revenues from duties on imports and from post fees. So basically postage stamps. And then they wanted to create a Supreme Court with members who are appointed by life from executive officers. Now, what we can see here is that we have kind of elements on both sides. They're going to be integrated into what we end up with as a one of those synthesis, okay, of that Hegelian dialectic. We have the thesis, the antithesis, and then we arrive at a consensus between the two called the synthesis. And okay. Okay, Sandy Aaron, welcome. Sorry, Weeping Willow, my channel, and I just ask that we respect each other. And when you start castigating people's religion, that's not respectful. You can call it truth all you want to, and you can believe that all you want to. You are. I don't want to change your beliefs. I just want you to be kind, polite, and respectful to the people who are here and to me. And so, sorry we disagree. So we have the Great Compromise. Okay, so if we take a look at those, we ended up with a very strong federal government. more stronger than what we had under the Articles of Confederation. We ended up with two houses. The Senate that had its senators, 2 per state, regardless of the size of the state. You had 2 representatives per state. Those were appointed by the state legislatures originally until the 17th Amendment. And then we had the representatives who were elected by the people. Okay. Now we had further controls on that because we wanted the people to have control over declaration of war. We wanted the people to have control over taxation, raising of revenues, and all those kinds of things. So if you take a look at Article 1, Section 8, there's a very limited amount of stuff that the legislature is allowed to do. So one of them, for example, is that the all bills raising revenue especially from taxation, have to originate in the House of Representatives. So if you look back to Obamacare had a provision in it that was going to tax people or charge a revenue based on the plan that they chose. Okay. And that's what was fought at the Supreme Court. And so Chief Justice Roberts revised the terminology. He rewrote Obamacare, which he's not supposed to do. He's just supposed to make an adjudication, not rewrite. So he rewrote it so that it was no longer a revenue bill, because if it passed as a revenue bill, then it was illegal because it was supposed to originate in the House of Representatives and not in the Senate. So by rewriting it, by the Chief Justice rewriting it and making a non-revenue generating bill, then it was allowed to stand as having been originated in the Senate, if all that makes sense. Okay. So we were going to have one representative for every 30,000 people. Now, this is the one that people really get upset over, and that is that the slave states had more slaves than they did slave owners. Okay, so they so it says, and I'm looking in the Constitution, so representatives and direct taxes shall be apportioned among the several states which may be included within this union according to the respective numbers, which shall be determined by adding to the whole number of free persons, including those bound to service for a term of years, and excluding Indians not taxed, and 3/5 of all other persons. So this is quite often referred to as the 3/5 rule. So remember, here's what it says. Free people, one person gets to count towards that 30,000 for representation. An indentured person, not to exceed 7 years on the indentured list, is included in that 30,000. Indians are excluded from that 30,000 population, and all others, it doesn't say slaves, it says all others are to be represented at 3/5 of their number. So for every 5 of the other category, whoever was in that other category, they got 3 of those counted towards that 30,000 for representation and for having a representative in Congress for them. In one house of the legislature, later called the House of Representatives, they would be directly elected by the people. And then the other house, they would be the second house of the legislature, later called the Senate. Each state would have an equal vote, and representatives would be selected by the state legislatures. Now, that kind of got changed a little bit later under the 17th Amendment. I believe it's the 17th Amendment, where we did away with the states appointing their legislators, and it was put up for common vote. So now we vote for senators as well. Well, what that does is that effectively negates the 10th Amendment. Remember, and I'll get to that here just one second. Okay, yeah, 17th Amendment. So the Senate of the United States shall be comprised of 2 senators from each state elected by the people thereof for 6 years, and each senator shall have 1 vote. So the 17th Amendment did away with the states appointing the senators and made it to where they were elected directly by the people. So now the people are represented in both houses and the states are not, which is why we've seen a decline in states' rights, which is the 10th Amendment, ever since that was passed. And when was that passed? 1933. So since 1933, the state's authority has really started to be on a decline, and we've been more towards a more centralized, focused federal government. Okay, let me see where we are. Got some good discussions about weather. Yeah, it's supposed to get down into the 30s here tonight, too. Thank you, Fioxerus. He says, and thank you, Sandy. I hate asking people to leave, but at the same time, I think that we have to be respectful. I'm not Mormon, but I defend their right to believe what they believe. And life is way too short for us to spend time talking evil about other people. We just need to be nice to each other. That's so Butch, here's my theory. I loved living in Germany, and so Germany's extremely cold. The way I look at it, it gets up into the 100 mid 110s here in Central Texas in the summer. We had pretty close to 105 days over 100 degrees here in Central Texas this year. So the way I look at it is my 12 years in Germany, I could always put more clothes on. But when it's 115 degrees outside, you can't take all your clothes off and get comfortable. So I prefer cold weather to warm, but that's only because I live in an extremely hot climate. So if I lived where you do in Colorado, I would probably feel the same way you do. Although I will say, when I lived in Germany, when it gets up to 85 degrees, Germans start dying of heat stroke. So I don't know, cats and prepping. That's a good question. I don't know. I don't think anybody really knows. Maybe it was the population of one of the towns, Boston or something like that at the time. And it's a good number to use for representation. Okay. So they had to get the approval, the ratification of all the states. So there was one issue that was left on the table. It really did not get dealt with effectively. It got dealt with, but not as effectively as a lot of people wanted it to, and that's the issue of slavery. So I want to read this paragraph. It says, the Great Compromise dealt with one major concern of the framers and how best to treat the differences in large and small states. But other problems also stemmed largely from regional differences. Slavery, which formed the basis of much of the southern states' cotton economy, was one of the thorniest issues to address. To reach an agreement on the Constitution, the framers had to craft a compromise that balanced northern commercial interests with comparable southern concern. Eventually, the framers agreed that Northerners would support continuing the slave trade for 20 more years, as well as a 20-year ban on taxing imports to protect the cotton trade, while Southerners consented to a provision requiring only a majority vote on navigation laws, and the national government was given the authority to regulate foreign commerce. It was also agreed that the Senate would have the power to ratify treaties by a 2/3 majority, which assuaged the fears of Southern states who made up more than 1/3 of the nation. So if you make up a little bit more than 1/3 and you need to have 2/3 to impose something on the others, that's a pretty safe margin. Okay. You know that you can always vote down anything that's going to be used against you. So that was that compromise that they had. Now, here's a couple critical things you need to understand. So here we are in 1787, and they're saying that there's going to be they're going to allow to continue to have slaves imported into the U.S. for, I think it was 20 years, right? Yeah, for 20 more years. Then after that, there could be no more slaves brought into the U.S. Let me tell you, every good intention has terrible consequences. So the intention is to stop the importation of slaves. Okay, as of basically 2005. I'm sorry, 1805. So as of 1805, 20 years after 1785, no more slaves could be brought into the U.S. Okay, and then they said they would have the Maritime Congress or maritime rules, which would basically blockade. We're going to have the U.S. Navy blockade the coast so that no more slaves could be brought in. But we still have this terrible economy in the South, cotton, that is totally dependent upon slaves. So if that's the case, what are you going to do? You're going to force your slaves who are already there to produce more through their family and offspring in order that you have a continual influx of new population as far as workers. So the actual treatment of the slaves got worse because they tried to turn some of the women into baby factories, and some of the stronger, bigger guys, they turned them into the bull in the cow pen and all these kinds of things. And so really what happened was, by not allowing the new slaves to come in, the treatment of the existing slaves got even harsher and even worse. And that's we all have our terrible parts of history, and these are the dark days of the United States. And unfortunately, from 1805 until the Emancipation Proclamation in 1864, 1863, we pretty much have some of the darkest times in the southern states of the U.S. Yeah, it does. It does. That's a large number to us. So one of the things about Arizona, my last 4 years on active duty, I was at Fort Huachuca, which is in the southeast corner. Down Fort Huachuca was the military fort that provided the Buffalo Soldiers who protected Tombstone, the silver mines in Tombstone. So I will tell you, I have seen times. As a matter of fact, when I was supposed to fly to Korea for the Olympics in 1988, we did the counter-terrorist stuff, and we had a hard time. We had to wait until evening to fly out of Sky Harbor in Phoenix because of two things. Number one, the temperature was just enough to where it made the asphalt on the taxiways kind of soft, and the airplanes had a hard time rolling on the tarmac until they got to the actual concrete runway. Number two, hot air is thinner than cold air. So because of the elevation plus the thinner air, because it's so hot, most of the runways were not long enough to get up enough speed and enough Bernoulli effect over the wings, the lift, to get the aircraft up into the air. So there weren't any takeoffs during the daytime. During the summer, some of the summers that I was in Arizona. Okay, so that's basically where that is. So I'm looking to see if it says anything particular about the 30,000s. I don't see it. Okay, so now let's get into the next thing. And remember, they said that they wanted to have the popular vote. So the Virginia plan was to have the people elect the president, and the Delaware plan, New Jersey plan, I keep saying Delaware, New Jersey plan was to have it appointed by the legislature. So how do you combine the two of those? The way you combine the two of those is into one is you have what's called the Electoral College. So the Electoral College consists of all of the senators plus all of the representatives together, and they cast their vote for who is going to be the president. So the representatives, the House of Representatives, the representatives are supposed to vote in accordance with, I say supposed, in theory, they would vote the way the majority of their constituents voted. So the people, let's say in a county, voted 17,000 for candidate A and 13,000 for candidate B. Then candidate A got the vote of that representative. When they went back to DC, they would then cast that vote for candidate A. Okay. Now the senators were supposed to vote the way that the legislature voted. Now, why is that? Because remember, the legislatures of the states are directly elected by the people of the states. So if the vast majority of the state wanted party A to be in control, and they are in the legislature, then the legislature is going to designate its 2 senators to vote for candidate A instead of candidate B, right? So you have this indirect vote by the people up to the state, and then the state has the authority to direct its senators how to vote. So that's how the Electoral College came around, was an equal representation of states' rights of selecting the president, which was basically the New Jersey plan. And then you had the Virginia plan, which was the people directly electing the president, but they did it through their representatives. So that's kind of how they put the 2 of those together into one. The unfinished part was the executive branch. So Alexander Hamilton noted in Federalist Paper number 68, strongly recommend you get a copy of the Federalist Papers, because it's John Jay, Alexander Hamilton, and Thomas Paine basically describing, and I think Thomas Jefferson has a couple in there as well, describing why they wrote some of the things that they did into the Constitution. So it's their way of behind the scenes, this is why we did what we did. So the Electoral College was fashioned to avoid the tumult and disorder of the framers, who feared could result if the masses were allowed to vote directly for the president. Instead, the selection of the president was left to a small number of men who possessed the information and discernment requisite to decide, in Hamilton's words, the complicated business of selecting the president. So that's kind of how you kind of had that compromise between the 2. Then we came up with the preamble. We, the people of the United States, in order to form a more perfect union, do, that whole thing. Alexander Hamilton wrote most of that. So what do we have the Constitution? What is it that we want to do? To create a more perfect union, to establish justice, ensure domestic tranquility, provide for the common defense. Remember, the common defense was missing in the Articles of Confederation. Promote the general welfare and secure the blessings of liberty to ourselves and to our posterity, our children. Do hereby ordain this Constitution of the United States. Okay. Now, part of this idea that we have this tricameral government, or 3 branches of the government. We have the legislative branch that writes the laws. We have the executive branch that enforces the laws. And then we have the judicial branch that interprets the laws. Okay. So each one had equal power over the others until Marbury versus Madison in 1807. Let me see if it's in here. Anyhow, Marbury versus Madison, basically what happened was the Supreme Court came up with the Supreme Court decision saying that their decisions are supreme. So unless the legislature passes a law or an amendment to the Constitution to contradict a Supreme Court decision, the Supreme Court decision stands. So, and when they're interpreting the Constitution, of course, the only way you can overcome a Supreme Court decision is through an amendment to the Constitution. So, and we just had a major exercise of that in the Dobbs decision here very, very recently. Okay. So if we look back to 1972, when Roe v. Wade was decided, okay, the original decision was that she was allowed to have an abortion without the consent of the father of the child. Okay. Well, that was enough because you take that was allowed to have an abortion without the consent means you're allowed to have an abortion, period. So that is the phrase basically that legalized abortion in the United States for approximately 50 years. So nowhere did it talk about the rights of women to abort. What it said was the right of a woman to have an abortion without her husband's consent or without the consent of the father of the child was there. So that's what the decision said. So, but the thing is, nowhere in the Constitution does it say that the federal government or the Supreme Court has the authority to make that decision. Okay. So remember, we have a limiting constitution. So Article 1, Section 8 is everything that the Congress is allowed to do. So if you read Article 1, Section 8, okay, that's not in there. They're not allowed to say, yes, you can or no, you can't. Well, what happens if it's not mentioned in Article 1, Section 8? Then we have to go back to that one that basically has been kind of repealed by the 17th Amendment. And we go back here to the 10th Amendment, if I can find it. And so let's read the 10th Amendment. So the 10th Amendment says, basically, the powers not delegated to the United States by this Constitution, remember that's Article 1, Section 8, nor prohibited to it by the states. So the states say, I don't want to make this decision, you make it. If they do that, if they relegate their authority back to the federal government, then the federal government is given the authority to make that decision, are reserved to the states respectively or to the people, which is the 9th Amendment. So basically, the Constitution says that on Roe v. Wade, the Supreme Court didn't have the authority to make that decision, that basically it was the states who had to make the decision. But why did we have it to the Supreme Court in the first place? Because they didn't like the way the states were regulating it. So if we take a look at the Constitution and the Articles of Confederation, why did we have what we did? We wanted, if you don't like the laws in the state you live, move. Just go to a different state where you like the laws more. For example, I would never live permanently in California. I don't like the laws there. Okay, I totally disagree with them. I like the laws here in Texas. I like the laws in New Hampshire. I could live in New Hampshire. They're a pretty good state. I could live in Idaho. Gosh, Kansas isn't bad. Kansas has terrible. I don't know if they still do, but when I was in Kansas, they had some of the worst liquor laws I've ever seen. Yet you could drink 3.2 beer at 18, but then once you turn 21, you could get alcohol and regular 6.0 beer. But there were two different kinds of clubs for regular alcohol. You had to apply to the sheriff's office, the background check, and all this other kinds of stuff. So you could either go to a Class B club, which is basically a BYOB club. So you bought your bottle of booze at the state liquor store, carried that to the place where you wanted to drink. They put your bottle behind the counter, put a mark on it where it was. Then when you wanted a drink, let's say you wanted rum and Coke, okay, they would pour you some of your own rum into a glass and then pour you some Coke on top of it and then charge you both for the rum and for the Coke, even though the rum was your own in the first place, okay? So that was that one. Then you had a Class C club, which you had to apply to the state, do a background check, no criminal background, all that kinds of stuff. Now this one, you had to buy tax stamps. So basically, you could go into any club that you were a member of. You had to apply for membership and get approved by the sheriff and all this kind of stuff. And when you went in, you said, I want a rum and Coke. They would say, okay, that's $3.50, $4.50. And so to an average person, say, what? So it's $3.50 cash for the Coke, and then $4.50 in tax stamps out of your tax book to pay for the rum. So really stuff. And Kansas was the only state, and it still might be, that you're not allowed to consume alcohol over the state while you're in an aircraft flying over the state. So but that's the way we were designed, is so that each state could have its own individual laws established. And we'll get into this one. Well, this is the 26th Amendment, I believe it is, was caused because of the states have the right to determine the age of voting. Okay, so during the Vietnam era, we were my generation, we were being drafted and told we had to go off and fight and get killed. And so the average age of the soldier being killed in Vietnam was about 19. And we said, why should we do that? If we don't have the choice to say what we want to happen in our country, why would we go overseas and fight for it? And so as a result of that, in 1972, the 26th Amendment was changed. And the 26th Amendment said that in order to vote for the national election, you only had to be 18. So it reduced the age to vote to 18. Well, there are 4 states. Most of the states lowered their state requirements for age to vote in the states to 18 as well. But there were 4 states that what they did was they said, okay, you can vote in the federal election at 18, but you can't vote in the state election until you're 21. And that's what the Constitution says, was, you could control these stuff. So that's why we had to pass the 26th Amendment that says, the right of citizens of the United States who are 18 years of age or older to vote shall not be denied or abridged by the United States or any state on account of age. And the Congress shall have power to enforce this article by legislation. So 1982, basically all of a sudden, 18-year-olds were given the right to vote, both in local elections as well as in federal elections. Okay. So the idea is that we have a federal system, federalism in our government, where we have a centralized government, but we also have decentralized government. So actually, where all the power is supposed to be is at the state and local authorities, and then that kind of goes up. So you have an inverted pyramid, if you will, where the people are making the decisions and sending those decisions up to the top of the pyramid. That's the way it's supposed to work. We've kind of inverted that to where now our elected officials think that we work for them rather than they work for us. So let me catch up with where we are. I'm going to mark this page as where we are, and we'll call it quits for the book for the night and see where we are in the chat. And then we're getting close to time to quit. So, okay. So Sandy says, or the rights of the child. Absolutely. So, but that really in the constitutional question, up until the Dobbs decision, that really was never a part of the equation. Nobody ever took that into consideration. Sandy, I'm jealous. I would love to live in Idaho. John Marshall and the Marshall Plan. We'll get into that later. Yeah. I will tell you how it was enforced when I was on an airplane flying over Kansas. Is they just simply told you they couldn't sell it. You could continue to drink what you had already purchased, but you could not purchase any new drinks while they were flying over the state. So that's how they enforced it back. And this was back in the early mid 70s. Okay, when that was going on. So South Dakota has strange liquor laws too. In the early 80s, Dallas had wet, dry areas. Then 18, 19, 21 age to buy or consume in about that same time. My birthday, on my birthday in Texas lowered the drinking age to 18. My 21st birthday, they lowered the drinking age to 18. 2 weeks later, my baby sister turned 18. We went out drinking together. Then they changed the law, and they realized they'd made a mistake, and so they started raising it 1 year per year until it got back up to 21. So we're back up to 21 now. But my sister was able to vote to drink the whole time because she had hit that mark of 18. Now the strange thing is, I grew up on the border with Mexico, a little town called El Paso, made famous by Marty Robbins, and Ciudad Juarez is right across the river. So as long as you had dollars, the drinking age in Juarez was, do you have dollars? If you have dollars, you can drink. And I can't tell you how many times I was the last driver's ed class in El Paso to get my driver's license at 14. So we would quite often go over to the Santa Fe Bridge, park our car on the American side, walk across, get blitzed, and come back. In high school, 14, 15, 16, 17 years old. Unbelievable. But that's the way it was. I'm not sure about that, because I know that you can still get 3.2 beer in a lot of places at 18. So I don't know. I'm not willing to go that far to say that it is, but I'm also not going to say you're wrong. Okay. I will just tell you, I don't know for sure, but I do think there are still 3.2 laws. And I know that there's different laws for spirits, for wine, and for beer, and then light beer. So I know there's different ones for each one. North Carolina has some pretty tough laws. You know, you got to buy yours at what they call an ABC, Alcoholic Beverage Control Center. So all of their booze stores are owned by the state. You know, here you can get beer, wine in your local grocery store. Used to be you couldn't get them on Sundays up until around 74. Couldn't buy booze at all on Sundays. And we also had blue laws. There were certain things that you could not buy on Sundays. You could buy baby formula, but you couldn't buy a bottle to put it in, you know, because of the blue laws. They would have entire sections of the grocery store roped off on Sundays, so you couldn't buy stuff. Then we did away with that as well. I was part of a committee free in '83 in San Angelo, Texas, because each voting district sets its own liquor laws in Texas. So you can make them stricter, but you can't make them looser than the federal requirement. And we had several dry districts, precincts in San Angelo, and we wanted to have wet precincts. And so we voted in 1983 and basically got liquor by the drink in San Angelo, Texas in 1983. Okay, what questions do you have concerning what we've discussed so far this evening? 1973. Okay, I think I said 1972. Thank you for that. Thank you, Diana, too. Sumi, I'll tell you the truth. A lot of us have very little knowledge in this area. So, you know, and you being from Canada, I mean, thank you for your interest and thank you for your comments, because, you know, it's this great experiment we have that we're still enduring here in the U.S. and trying to get it right. We're still trying to get it right. We don't have it perfect. You know, we constantly try to improve. And we have our setbacks. You know, so but as long as we understand it's a great experiment in republicanism. So I will show you one thing. By the way, the only form of government ever mentioned in the Constitution. Okay, you hear people say you're destroying our democracy, and you know the thing is we don't have a democracy. Benjamin Franklin called the democracy as mob rule. So if you go to Article 4, Section 4, it says right here, the United States shall guarantee to every state in this union a republican form of government. And that's the only form of government that's ever mentioned in the Constitution. So if anybody ever says we have a democracy, you can tell them not according to the Constitution. According to Article 4, Section 4 of the Constitution, we have a republican form of government. Diana, too, I think a convention of states is outstanding. Mark Levin wrote a book on some of the amendments that he would like to see. For example, he would like to see a balanced budget amendment. If Congress can't come up with a balanced budget, then they're discharged. You know, that we have to have equal revenue. We have to have zero revenue, zero red line, green line. We have to have a balanced budget. And that's one of the things he wants in that. So then he also recommends an amendment that talks about how to overturn a Supreme Court decision. So, I mean, there's 17 great amendments that Mark Levin has recommended. Now, the opposition to that is people say, well, it's going to open up a can of worms. So they're going to pass all these laws. No, they're not. Because remember that in order to amend the Constitution, you have to have 3/4 of the state's legislatures agree that it's a good decision to change the Constitution that way. And so And one of the things he does, he wants to repeal the 17th Amendment. So do I. Get back to states' rights, where the states appoint the senators and we elect the representatives. So, that's kind of where we are there. Oh, wow. That's terrible. That's what a terrible thing. Virginia has ABC stores too. So it looks like in Wyoming, they have the same thing. They have state control of sale of alcohol. I was surprised. I mean, I went up to visit a cousin in Chicago, and in Chicago, you can go in anytime, any grocery store. They have everything. Just it's all right there. Okay, so Sandy says that they voted and changed that in their state. Little known prepper says 18 for beer and wine. So let me tell you a story about what happened. When I was in Monterey, California, language school, they had a fantastic winery called Bargetto Wineries, and they had a tasting room down on Fisherman's Wharf. In Texas, as a parent, regardless of the age of my child, I can take my child into any place I want to with me. And if I want to order a beer and serve that to my child, that's my child. I can serve them a beer. That's, parents' rights here in Texas. So we went, after I went over and did all this overseas work in the Pacific for Dell, I had enough American Airlines miles, air travel miles, where we took a 2-week fly drive vacation to California. And I took them to Monterey, to my favorite winery. And Allison said, "What does that taste like?" And I said, "Well, here, sweetheart, have a taste." And I handed her my wine glass. Man, that bartender came over the wine, slapped over the bar, slapped it out of her hand. It broke, wine all over the floor and everything else. He says, "What in the hell are you doing? You trying to get me shut down?" I said, "She's my daughter. I'm allowed to serve her." He says, "Where are you from?" I said, "Texas." He says, maybe you can do that in Texas. Under 21, no booze whatsoever. They're not even allowed to look at it. He said, and likewise, when she was getting ready to go into the 5th grade, we did an American history tour up in Boston, Salem, Lexington, Concord, Plymouth Rock, the whole thing, the whole historical revolution thing. And so I figured, well, we'll stop by Cheers in Boston Commons, and because that was a pretty good TV show at the time, and we'll go in there and get some souvenirs. They wouldn't even let Allison inside the bar at all. So you had to be over 21 to enter into the bar. So each state has its own way of doing things, and I'm not going to say one's right and one's wrong. I'm just going to say each state is different, and if you don't like the way it is in your state, move to a state where the laws. One of two things: either move to a state where the laws are the way you like them, or change the laws in your state. That's your two options. I'm trying to get this doggone. The other day I was telling my wife, I hate Apple. My daughter told me that this was the best computer to buy. She wanted me to replace my Windows machine with this, and I have more problems running this machine. Need more trivia questions. Okay, we'll see what we can do. I'll see what I can gen up for you. Yeah, the first time I got carded was on my 21st birthday, which was strange. So my dad was with me, and he laughed. Yes, we are. And if I can get this up there, we are on a fast track towards socialism, and it all started basically during the Depression under FDR. And do you realize, here's another piece of trivia for y'all, how many Supreme Court justices were there up until the FDR administration? There were 5, okay, and then 7, and then 9, because FDR wanted to appoint more justices so that he would have more people liberally interpreting the Constitution the way he wanted it interpreted, instead of just a set number. So there is no number established in the Constitution. So that's all passed through the Senate, and so now there is a move afoot to do a couple things. Number one, they want to make DC a state, which is in the Constitution. You can't do that. We'll have to have a constitutional amendment to do that. But that would give them 2 senators and give basically that party, because DC is 100% Democrat, give that party a 2-vote majority. The other one is to give Puerto Rico statehood, and that would give them a 4-vote majority in the Senate, almost in perpetuity. The other thing is what President Biden wants to add 4 more Supreme Court justices that he gets to appoint. So that would give him the majority of his appointments in the Supreme Court, so that he could then interpret the Supreme Court, interpret the Constitution the way he wants it, which is basically what FDR did. Okay. Yes, I think we do need it. Thank you, Pat. Appreciate that. Okay, so here's where we are. I do want you to know I've got a couple of interviews I'm getting lined up. I think I've told you I'm a member of St. Vincent de Paul. So that's the Catholic Charities, and we help neighbors, is what we call people who are in need, with problems when they have problems, financial problems, housing problems, food problems, all kinds of problems. But we go out and help them. And our charter says that we have to meet twice a month. And so we meet at 6 o'clock on Mondays. And it was okay as long as we met here at the church, which is only a couple blocks away. And because I could leave, it goes from 6 to 7:30. I could leave there at 7:30 and be here in my driveway by 7:40. But we've changed the meeting location. So now it's all the way across the county. So I would have to either leave the meeting early, or I'm going to have to start this evening 15, 20 minutes late twice a month. I like consistency. I don't like, every other Tuesday we're at 9 o'clock and these Tuesdays we're at 8 o'clock. And I don't want to do that stuff. So do me a favor, send me some emails. Let me know what your suggestions are, whether you're willing to move to a different night. And if so, what night would be better for you, so that I don't have to worry about being late, 2 nights a month, or if a different time slot would work for you. Let me know, how can we keep my involvement in the Society of St. Vincent de Paul and my important work there at the same time as meeting the needs of our small community and getting information out to you all. So whatever you can do, recommendations wise, please send them to me in email. And that's coldwarprepper@outlook.com. And I would greatly, greatly appreciate that. I did not see that. Thank you for sharing that, Little Lone Prepper. I bet that was great. Okay. Okay, so that's kind of where we are. So, let's see. Holly's flexible as well. Let me grab my Bible. If I can reach that far without pulling a rib. Numbers, chapter 6, verses 24, 25, 26. The Lord bless you and keep you. The Lord let his face shine upon you and be gracious to you. The Lord look upon you kindly and give you peace. So I'm going to be doing a series here in the very, very near future. I want to do, number one, I've had a lot of comments, and so I want to kind of respond to some of the comments on the videos I've been doing, as well as on some of the lives. And I'm thinking about, Lee, you've been doing this a while. Why do you, ? Periods, and have a discussion around why do I do some of the things the way that I do them, and why I don't do them the way other people think that that's the proper way. And so just give you my rationale why I do some of the things the way I do. Number two, and this is going to be primarily for my neighborhood, but I think it's going to be beneficial for everybody. I want to do a series of 3. So number one, I want to do, what do you do to stay warm if the power goes out? Because we have a very fragile power grid. Iran is threatening us, and I am super afraid that we're going to have some terrorists take out our power grid. What are we going to do to stay warm? This is going to be, according to Farmers Almanac, everything I'm reading, this is going to be one of the coldest winters on record. How can we stay warm in the coldest weather on record without any power? Okay, so how can we do that? So that's another video I want to get done here in the very near future. How can we cook outdoors after the power failure? So that's going to be the second in that series. And the third one's going to be how can we cook indoors with the power failure? So those are the three that I have on the hooks right now. If you have any other ideas or any other questions or any other suggestions, please email those to me as well. Okay. So here we are. Remember, we're all in this together. Please be kind, polite, and respectful to each other. Respect other people's religion. Respect what other people believe. Just because people believe differently from you, I believe that what I believe is right, but it's right for me. And that's I think what we need to do is understand that how I believe is right for me, how you believe is right for you. I don't have the right to tell you you're wrong. Please don't tell me that I'm wrong. What we need to do is find out how we can put this together. I had a wonderful luncheon the other day with the Lutheran priest, and he and I were talking about the differences, but we also are taking a look at what are the things that we have in common. And when you get down to it, we all have far more in common than we have differences. So just respect each other, respect how other people believe, and see what we can do to find out how we can unite rather than divide. So thank you all so much for being here. I love you all. Thank you so much. Have a blessed evening. Take care. Bye-bye.